The order will be case in order and two off. So everybody that's not ready, we'll begin. Let's start with solvency. China will say no to any diplomatic or economic relations. China history fuels this. Nagarian 15. Xi is obsessed with retaining the central authority of the Chinese Communist Party. Authority is being challenged because of concerns about China's ability to maintain strong growth. Xi spends a huge slice of energy on making sure that the party stays on top, and she wants to re-gear China's economy from an export-led to domestic consumption-led. China sees the U.S. as trying to pose its growing international status. Its success with Asia Investment Bank is a clear sign of the power of its huge currency reserves. None of this means there will be much trust in the air. China has a 2,500-year history of strategic thinking driven by a deep distrust of international players. Don't expect a People's Daily front page proclaiming a new era of Chinese openness towards the West. What this evidence tells you is very important because it says that right now there's a history of why China would say no. It's not that we're just claiming it, it is proven through 2,500 years of history. China will say no to such an economic plan through agriculture. Next, let's look to the first advantage, economy. I have two responses here. First, their evidence is designed to deceive you. The first card says BIT is key to economy, but that doesn't say anything about agriculture. As far as we can tell, ag is the only tiny fraction of the BIT. Therefore, this advantage is not substantial in any way. Second, the plan is not needed. Agriculture is not the key to the Chinese economy. Manufacturing and services solve. Rawson 15. China makes and sells more manufacturing goods than any other country on the planet. Manufacturing is the largest, most diverse sector in the country. Products are frequently churned out for government use or immediately put on boats and shipped to foreign customers. Healthy services sectors is a sign of healthy domestic consumption, and per capita wealth increases. In other words, the Chinese people are gaining the capacity to afford their own output. What we see from this evidence is that the economy advantage doesn't hold water because manufacturing services are the key to the economy. The affirmative doesn't solve anything with that, and therefore this advantage doesn't hold weight. Next, look to the next advantage on resource wars. Two responses. First, this advantage lacks a true solvency card. Nowhere do we see evidence that signing the plan solves for all of the supposed food problems of China. Second, there is no resource wars. Best studies prove. Pinker and 11. Political science who track war and peace are skeptical that people fight wars over scarce resources. Shortages are common, but wars are not. End card there. This evidence tells you right now that there is not really a resource war whatsoever to be taking place, and therefore you cannot believe the probability of this advantage. Next, we'll move on to the two disadvantages of this plan. First disadvantage is the China Rise DA. The thesis of this disadvantage is that currently the Chinese economy is lagging behind, which will keep their military from growing. However, if you pass the affirmative plan, we would see the Chinese economy grow, which allows them to spend on military and ultimately leads to conflict due to simple miscalculations in high-risk areas. I have 4 points. First, China's stagnant economy, only thing holding them back from becoming military superpower. McDonald Wiseman in 2016. The slowdown of China's once sizzling economy has fueled anxiety over its impact on the rest of the world. Its economy grew last year as the slowest pace in a quarter century, and the reaction seemed to be mainly relief in its wasn't worse. Next point, the affirmative plan of engagement is designed to grow the Chinese economy, Farley 15. To call long-term engagement a strategy might be a step too far. The United States clearly facilitated the growth of the Chinese power in the early 1970s, and Washington preferred to believe that the Chinese economic growth would inevitably produce regime liberalization. Whether this amounted to a China strategy, engagement brought much heavier trade, investment, and integration. The United States eschewed the tools that the states often use to keep potential competitors down. This link definitely applies because that is the entire purpose of the 1AC. We asked them cross-examination, is your goal to grow the Chinese economy? They said yes, you know this disadvantaged links. Next point, stronger economic conditions enable the expansion of Chinese military and projection of its power, Gilton and 10. Just as China's second quarter domestic gross product showed its leading Japan, the U.S. Department of Defense was reporting that the country's economic achievements have enabled China to embark on a comprehensive transformation of its military, highlighted the country's rapid expansion of missiles, submarine, and space warfare capabilities, all made possible by its dramatic economic growth. End card there. The next point is there is a real risk of war. There is serious risk of miscalculation due to the extreme Chinese aggressiveness and tension. This goes nuclear, Ashen 16. They can almost certainly keep the lid on the for several years. As always happens when necessary reform is postponed, the eventual crisis will be larger. At this point, the temptation for the Communist Party leadership to play the nationalist card, perhaps with a military move, would be very strong. The very risk of miscalculation and escalation would be high. With angry nationalist public opinion in both countries, neither the Chinese nor the American leader can be seen to lose, and both sides have nuclear weapons. This is not ideal scaremongering. It's something the U.S. military intelligence and think tank communities think about all the time in order to avoid it. Second disadvantage: Chinese politics. The thesis of this disadvantage is the president of China is able to get policy reforms done. However, this political reform comes from an anti-Western position, which means if the affirmative forces their plan onto China, then Xi Jinping loses his influence, and reform will be placed with political instability, which leads to massive economic issues for China, leading to even bigger impacts on the entire world. I have 4 points. First, Xi has power to force reform now. Perception of outside influence undermines. Whitehead in 16. Xi's position of control over the financial ministry has been bolstered by the reshuffling. Finance Minister Zhu has been promoted to senior position in the economic panel led by Xi. His new role allows the president to directly control his interface function with the party. Li's attempting to finance training and entrepreneurship will be circumscribed by Xi's effective control. It appears to be conflict between Li's economic reforms and Xi's redistribution. Xi controls the finances and occupies the populist high ground. Li is the bad guy following a foreign agenda. Next point: perceived compliance with American powers such as affirmative plan angers the public and fuels support for militarism and nationalism. Agrees in 7. Chinese nationalist texts are full of references to American selfishness. Traits like selfishness and aggressiveness have been thrust upon the Western other. The U.S. hedge is a particularly important maker of difference vital to the Chinese constructions. Chinese hegemony is a judgment about an aggressive American character. The new discourse of civilization modes appears revisionist, promoting to distinctly Chinese regional order. It invokes a hierarchical China at the center vision of Eastern politics. Heightened Chinese perception of U.S. threat could promote the emergence of an acute security dilemma. Feeling threatened by a hegemonic U.S., China could decide to step up their military modernization. What we see from this evidence is that once we see that the United States is going to be pushing their agricultural agenda into China, we see the link happening, because what this does is if they believe that they have solvency to this plan, i.e. China does accept it, it's going to cause political mistrust in China because they will be seen as having followed a foreign agenda. We cannot allow that because this will lead to huge impacts, which we see in our next point. Xi's capital is key to reforms. Perception of international strength is critical to holding off nationalist challenges to its domestic economic agenda. Lieberthal in 13. We have to see whether we can forward consensus to make deep structural reforms in China. The country deeply needs it. They need to shift from an export-oriented, investment-focused economy to one focused on domestic consumption. That runs against vested interests in China. The question is whether he's able to rework incentives in the system. His real priority is domestic. He needs stability in order to undertake reform domestically. The Communist Party has natured very ardent nationalists domestically and can allow himself to get on the wrong side of that, or he will have the political capital to carry out reforms. He's trying to walk a tightrope. He has to be seen as strong in international affairs. And finally, failure of reform causes multiple issues: civil war, refugees, and nuclear war. Ian's story in 12. Political and economic collapse in the PRC resulting in territorial fragmentation, civil war, or waves of refugees would have a profound negative impact on regional stability. Problems are putting a strain on government. Timer is up. I'll finish this card. Strain on central government's ability to concern effectively. Disintegration of Chinese civil war might result in millions of refugees. An unprecedented exodus of refugees from a collapsed PRC would put a severe strain on neighbors. A fragmented China would result in nuclear weapons falling into the hands of irresponsible local provincial leaders or warlords. A disintegrated China would pose a threat to the world. And with that, I'm open for cross-examination.